In this video, we'll go over the request stage for contract management. We'll start off with this request cycle. We'll submit the provider request form, we'll locate a contract record, complete a provider requesting process, and approve or reject provider requesting. So these vendor records, you might be wondering how they are created. When a potential provider is interested in contacting with Memorial Care, you provide them with a direct link to the provider request form. Now, if they're going to request membership with both Memorial Care and Greater Newport physicians, they must submit the same form twice for each division if they want to contract with both. So just keep that in mind. However, if you want to do this for them, you can also go to all vendors and click new in the title bar to manually submit a provider request form on behalf of the interested organization. That being said, the regular provider request form that will be sent to the provider will likely be the most common way of doing this. To add additional providers, once a provider request form is submitted, a thank you message displays. The submitter has an option to add additional providers as needed. You'll see as this little thank you splash screen, it says, as you could read right here, if you would like to add a provider to this request, click here. And then when you click there, it takes you to this add provider form. You can see that it's a pretty short form, and it's very short in comparison to the previous provider request form. And the reason for that is that a lot of the information is not needed to be added. The way ServiceNow stores data means that the information about the actual vendor can be applied to this provider form. So when you're adding a new provider, you don't need to re-enter all of that again, which is nice. So as you can see, all this information in the add provider form is just information about the individual provider. Here's the actual contract form itself. So you can see various things here. Here's the additional options menu up in the corner. We called that the hamburger menu before, but really it is technically called the additional options menu. It will take you to a variety of additional options that we'll see over the course of the training. Each record has a unique identifying number. When you're in a list view, as we saw earlier, you click on that number to go to the actual form view. On these forms, you'll see some fields are gray and some fields are white. The gray fields are read-only. You can't change them. Sometimes in the course of the workflow, so as you can see, we're on the provider requesting stage of this workflow up here. At some stage of the workflows, some of the fields will gray or ungray. Some will become read-only and some will leave read-only state, depending on the stage that they're in. There are also fields that become mandatory too. You can see that there are two fields that are mandatory here. Actually, three fields that are mandatory, excuse me. Submitter name, submitter email, and assignment group. Now, two of these are read-only because they were filled in from previous information that was filled in, likely from the provider request form. However, this assignment group field can be changed. If this was empty, so if there was nothing here, this would turn red. So you're seeing all these gray asterisks next to these fields to show that they're mandatory. If they were red, it meant that nothing is there. You can see another one that I missed down here. Enter medical group is another required field. And as you can see, that's gray because it has been filled in. As we see here, data entered on the provider request and add provider forms are transferred over to the contract and joinder forms. So that's why all of this information that's grayed out has already been filled in, as I said before. All of these forms, or at least many of these forms, have tabbed sections too. So if you see instructions of look on the details tab or look on the generals tab, what we're asking you to do is you might need to scroll down a little bit on this depending on the screen resolution of your screen, but you'll see a details tab and a general tab right there. There's also a process flow formatter. A process flow formatter provides a graphical summary of the stages in a contract displayed at the top of the form. You might hear me refer to these as the chevrons because they take the form of chevrons. Here are all the stages that are in a contract, as you can see here. We may use all of these, we may not use all of these. Some of these, particularly in the provider requesting process, are sometimes skipped depending on the nature of the contract that's being signed. In any case, if a stage has been completed, you see the check mark next to it that says completed. The current stage has a blue underline under it, so you can always see which stage you're in. Now, when you're in a contract form field, look at the vendor right here, and you'll see this little I right next to it, this little I in a circle. That's a button, and when you highlight over that button, you'll see the actual company information there. This is the vendor information. It automatically populates from the provider request form, which represents the company name, a group of providers in the same office, in other words. The vendor field references the company table. This kind of goes to ServiceNow the way ServiceNow stores data. When some people look at ServiceNow lists for the first time, they think, oh, this is just like Microsoft Excel. It's stored in a spreadsheet. And that's sort of a good way of starting to think about the list in ServiceNow. But where ServiceNow's lists differ from Excel slightly is that the lists are hierarchical. The lists can relate to other lists. So this is a good example of it. Contract is a list in ServiceNow, as you saw on the sidebar. Information in the contract field, however, references a separate table where vendor information is shown. This might sound complicated, but the reason that it's done is because one vendor might have multiple contracts. In fact, one vendor often has multiple contracts, or it might have multiple joiners. And if we're relating one to many, you need relationships among lists. And when there is a relationship among a list, you could see it in this button. There'll be this little eye here. You can click on it and preview that record. If you want to open the record itself, you can click Open Record to actually view it. The submitter name and email. Submitter is the main point of contact from the vendor's side with Memorial Care. The submitter name and email are transferred onto the contract record from the provider request form. So in this case, Diana filled out this form, so Diana has the submitter email. State and substate. Contract management offers a state model to manage and track contracts from request to activation. In effect, what you're seeing up here, the substate is really what we'll be keeping track of most of the time here, because the substate is what's changing up here in this process flow. These state and substate fields are always read-only, so they always depend on other things you're doing, and you'll know which one you're in via this process flow up here. In terms of the actual states, a draft contract is a contract being requested. An active contract is a contract that already exists under Memorial Care or GNP. An expired contract previously existed under Memorial Care or GNP that has passed its end date, and a canceled contract was discontinued in the draft state. All contracts are automatically assigned to the MCMF contract management team. That was that required mandatory field that we saw earlier. A member of the contracting team then, at the beginning of the process, is assigned as the contract administrator. To do that, what you'll do is click on the field, look up. You'll see this little magnifying glass icon here. If you click on that, you can go to a separate window to do this looking up, or you can just type in the field itself. As you can see, we've typed in Carolyn's name, and it automatically feeds us Carolyn Acosta, who is on the MCMF contract management team. The Details tab. The Details section on the contract form displays additional information about the contract and associated joiners. Division, Edinger Medical Group, and model category values are transferred over from the provider request form, and the rest are to be populated in the progression of the contract. Document task activities through the life cycle of contract to communicate with internal stakeholders using what's called the Notes field. This is your main form of record keeping inside of ServiceNow. The activity section provides a complete history of the contract and its updates. You can find what, when, and who. What updates were made. In the case here, Laura has written, Dr. Narula has given his approval and moving the contract forward. That is what update was made. You also know when the update was made. As we can see here, this one was made on the 23rd of May. And then who made the updates. In here, Laura Torres is who made the updates here. If you want to filter what updates to show in the activities section, you use that little filter icon up here. Same as the filter icon that we used for filtering lists. Another related list we'll see at the very, very bottom of the screen is joiners. Joiners displays a list of all providers associated with the contract. A contract can have one to multiple joiners. To manually associate new joiners with a contract, you click New to add to this list. Let's look at an actual contract now to look at this, because some people get a little confused about exactly where this related list is, because they might not see it when they originally log on. Let's take a look. Okay, so here we are in our MCMF contract management dashboard. So let's scroll down on here a little bit and look for a draft contract to look at. This one looks good. So as you can see, this one has finished the provider requesting cycle and is in the prepare contract stage. And you can tell that it's done because, as we saw before, it's got the little check mark on it and the blue underline is under the prepare stage. You could see here that the submitter name and submitter email have been ungrayed at this stage. And as we said, some stages might be gray when you start them and then go ungray and then re-gray. It depends on the nature of what is happening. Because it's in the prepare contract stage, these fields can still be freely edited because it is understood that it is in a preparation stage. Here we see those tab sections we talked about earlier, and you can see that this is still mandatory. It's preloaded with saved data, but no less mandatory. And you'll notice that if we take away Mark's name here and move away, you can see that that turns to red, showing that we need to enter that. Let's put it back though. There's the details tab, and there's the general tab. So you can see the order that things have happened here. We had Elise create this, and then it moved into prepare contract on 604. So here's our joinders related list. There's only one joinder in here, but you can see that there could be more than one. So if you want to go to your joinder records, you'd go to it through this related list. And remember that I here? That's still a preview, just as it was up here. We can preview Chicago General Practitioners by clicking on this I, and by scrolling down, we can preview Doug Ross by clicking on this I. Very, very nice. And when we click on this number here, much like before, we're taken to the specific joinder record. Now, this has already completed the provider requesting process. Signature status still is pending, but as you can see, we've got plenty on there. Let's head back to the slides. You might have noticed directly above the joinders related list back in the contract, we had a related links section. Go to SharePoint will take you to the current contract folder in SharePoint. So if you need a quick way to get there, use that related link. And just under it is a very useful one. You'll see a link there that says send joinder request email. If you want to easily email the contract submitter a link to the add provider form, that's a way to do that. So let's say the submitter contacts you and says, oh, we want to add another joinder, and you need the form to do so. That's the link you click to send the submitter the link to that add provider form. It'll go to that email that we saw earlier. If you want to locate contracts, a contract record is created for every provider request form submitted. You locate these contract records by navigating to the MCMF contract management dashboard and going to all contracts from the sidebar here. You locate these contract records by navigating to MCMF contract management and going to all contracts, the MCMF management contract management application, of course, and then the all contracts module within that. From the MCMF contract management dashboard in the drafts contracts queue section, as we went before, you can also access it. You'll note that in the live demo I did before, I went to the draft contracts queue to find it, but you could also go to the sidebar to find it too. Both work. Now, a tip and trick that we saw before is filtering vendors or any list. If you click on any list and click the funnel icon, you can apply various conditions. We're using these little tall bars here to separate the three fields that you need to fill in, but we say type is MCMF contract management and doing business as starts with California Heart Associates. We'll show you all vendors that have California Heart Associates in their name, which as it turns out is just one, California Heart Associates. Once you click run, that enables the actual filter itself. Run is up here. Now, note that we said and here. There's also an or button here. So if you wanted to see things where either of them are true, but not necessarily both of them, you'd use that or button. Whereas if you wanted both of them to be true, as we see here, you click the and button. Note that the breadcrumbs update to display the new conditions. So we had smaller ones here that just said type equals MCMF contract management, but now we say type is MCMF contract management and doing business as starts with California Heart Associates. And you'll note that the condition does say starts with here. If you wanted it to end with something, you could put that in. If you wanted it to just contain something, you could also put that in. These are all possible conditions that you can use. You could save filter conditions too. To save your created filter conditions to reuse and apply again, click Save, then enter a name in the Save As field, then click Save again to the left of the current name. You could check your saved filters in the List Control menu, otherwise known as the hamburger menu that I mentioned earlier. You select Filters, then you select your saved filters to apply to the list. You could also create a favorite in the sidebar that same way as we saw before. There are 3 buttons that we use on ServiceNow that all can do very similar things, but not identical things. Submit, save, and update. They'll all generally be in the upper right-hand part of a form. So the submit button saves all information added to a form and displays only once before submission. Once a record is submitted, you'll no longer see that submit button. The save button, on the other hand, keeps all changes made to a form, but upon saving, the form view of the current record remains on screen. Update does the same thing. It also saves changes to the form. The difference is what happens after you save. When you use the update button, you will return to the previous screen seen before opening the record, unlike the save button where you stay on the screen. This is useful if you're going to need to know, say you're going to go back to the list anyway. So using update just saves you a click. Whereas if you need to stay on the form, use the save button to save yourself. How are jointer records created? They are generally created from the submission of the add provider form. However, you can manually create them as talked about before by clicking new in the jointers related list of a contract. Here's the jointer form. Very, very similar to that contract form that we looked at earlier. You'll notice, though, that the tab sections, there are a lot more of them. Notes, additional details, specialties, location, and POD assignment. And then our read-only and mandatory fields also apply to a jointer form and a unique identifying number. There are various lifecycle states in the provider request lifecycle. They go through an approval process, and its process is manually updated in the status field. They start off as new, then they go to awaiting review, endorsement, extended review, board approval, credentialing, final approval, approved, or rejected if they are not approved. We'll go through all of these states once we go through the jointer lifecycle. Put the jointer state of awaiting review when preparing to add a provider to the provider requesting meeting agenda. When doing this in the awaiting review state, you'll need to assign a POD and level to the jointer record. Now, if you are doing provider requesting, what you're seeing here is the feature of ServiceNow that is the least intuitive and user-friendly, in my opinion. So this is something to pay attention to if you ever find yourself doing this and needing to put in a physician-organized delivery. What you'll need to do is double-click on Insert a New Row whenever you see kind of an option that looks like this under the POD column, then select Level from the drop-down choices, and you'll insert as many PODs as applicable. Remember to save the jointer record from when adding PODs. Let me show you this in platform now because I feel like it is not intuitive and it's better to see this happen. Okay, so here we are on the jointer record that we were looking at before. Let's scroll down here. We're in the POD assignment tab here, as distinct from the notes tab, which it should start out on. So go to your POD assignment tab. And then if you need to add a physician organized delivery, double click on where it says insert a new row and then select the relevant one. Then click that little save button. Then to add the level, you double click under where it says level, and then you can choose whatever level you need to choose. So, and then if you need to add a new one, you double click new row underneath there, and then you can add what you need to add. Like I said, it's not something that inherently makes sense the first time you look at it, but now you are an expert. Let's go back to the slides now. Once everything's been saved and accounted for, the provider requesting meeting takes place to review the potential providers. This endorsement stage is kind of a storage container for that provider requesting meeting. Remember how I said you can branch off in different directions on these workflows? The provider requesting meeting determines the next state of the jointer to either extended review, which just means that they need more time to review the jointer, board approval, or credentialing. When a jointer record is in board approval state, it means that the board is reviewing and deciding whether to approve or reject the provider's request. If approved, manually update the state to credentialing. If rejected, set the state to rejected and the status to inactive, then provide the reason for it being inactive. All providers approved by the board in the previous stage begin their credentialing process. The credentialing process is done by the credentialing department and is not done in ServiceNow. So if you find yourself in the credentialing stage and managing a jointer record in the provider requesting process, the contract coordinator will be notified, and if that's you, you're notified to update the record to that final approval state. Again, since credentialing is done by the credentialing department outside of ServiceNow, this is just something you'll have to get an email to know about. In that final approval stage, providers that completed and passed the credentialing process are presented to the board for a final approval or rejection. You'll populate the credentialing completed field once it is known. Once notified from the board, update the state to approved or rejected. When a provider reaches the completion of the provider requesting process, update the state to approved to begin contracting stages. Remember that in order to approve a contract, its associated providers, otherwise known as joinders, must be approved first. In the joinders related list of a contract, what you'll want to do is confirm that the records are approved and have a credentialing completed date before going to approve a contract. You can see that over here in the related list that we have approved down here and credentialing completed. You'll use some of these other fields too later on in the process. You'll assign a contract administrator then too. After joinders are approved, assign a contract administrator to the contract in the contract administrator field, then approve contract to begin the contracting stages. Once approved, contract advances to the prepare contract stage. If you are a contract coordinator, this is where the fun really begins. In the prepare contract stage, what you'll want to do is populate the following fields within the details tab of the contract record. Agreement type, which you can see here, then starts, and then contract model. Contract file name is required, but it is automatically populated based on the values given to the model category, agreement type, starts, and contract model fields. Contract model is also required too, but the reason that you need to fill in agreement type and starts before then is because it is a filtered list, and we don't need every contract model for every contract. So once you fill in the agreement type and the start date, it will let you do that because it will use the start date from this starts field in the file name, and then it will use the agreement type to give you the contracts that it has available for you. You can see a good example here. This contract model is GNP SPSE, which means Greater Newport Physicians, which is our division, SPSE, Specialist Exclusive. So you can see that all of these fields are applying to which contract model is even shown. Here's an important little feature though. The contract file name must match in ServiceNow and SharePoint. If you need to update that contract file name, contact your supervisor because they will need to get that change because those file names must match. Once all of these fields that we've talked about have been filled in, click Create SharePoint Contract to generate the contract template in the SharePoint draft folder. Once the contract is created in SharePoint, fields on the ServiceNow contract record become read-only. Let's look in the platform once more to look at the contract form. Okay, here's a contract in the prepare contract stage. As you can see, its contract administrator has been set to Carolyn Acosta. Let's look down in that details tab to talk about some of what we need to fill in. As you can see, the contract model is blacked out. So what we'll need to do is add an agreement type. Let's just say it's an exclusive and a start date. Let's say July 31st. Now that we've entered the agreement type and start date, you'll notice that this contract model ungrayed and became a mandatory field. So let's click this up and select our contract model. And you can see here that the contract model file name, or the contract model rather, has influenced the file name. So you can see here it says GNP SPSE, Kids Pediatrics, and then it has the date over at the end of it. And remember, if you want to change the name of this at any point, make sure to talk to your supervisor. That's all for now. Please continue the MCMF contract management training by watching the following video to learn about preparing a draft contract and more.